Hi there, or should I say, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm really glad you've joined us tonight. Now before we begin, take a moment to get settled. If you're still sitting upright, maybe it's time to lie back. Turn off any bright lights. Maybe go ahead and turn that fan off too. Let the room be still, quiet, cool. Slide into your covers. Sink into the softness of your pillow. Let your phone rest face down beside you. You won't need it now. Tonight, I'll be taking you somewhere gentle. Somewhere quiet. Far from screens. Far from noise. Far from now. We're going back almost 1,000 years. To a simple village nestled among the hills where women rose with the sun and ended their days spinning stories into thread. So close your eyes if you'd like, let your breathing slow, and allow yourself to drift into the rhythm of a time long past. This is the quiet life of medieval women. Their washing, weaving, and wool. Before the rooster's first crow, before the village bell rang from the chapel tower, the world was already stirring. In the low, timbered cottages of medieval England, a woman rose from her straw-filled mattress. Her bed was shared, perhaps with a husband, perhaps with children, or even an elderly parent. The air was cold. The fire from the night before had gone to ash. She moved quietly, her woolen dress pulled over her shift. Her feet slipped into leather shoes stiff from yesterday's damp. The hearth was her first stop. With practiced hands, she stirred yesterday's embers. A breath. A curl of smoke. The fire caught. As the orange glow spread through the room, shadows fled to the corners, and the scent of yesterday's bread lingered in the air. A kettle of water was placed to warm. Outside, dew hung from every blade of grass. The village was not awake yet, but she was. And soon, so would be the rest of her day. By mid-morning, the quiet of the house had given way to soft voices, clinking pots, and the warmth of the hearth. Outside, mist still clung to the grass, but the sky was beginning to brighten, a pale silver hue stretching above the rooftops of thatched homes. It was washday, and that meant the walk to the stream. A woman gathered her tools, a wooden tub, a length of coarse lye soap, and linen cloths worn smooth by many seasons of scrubbing. There was no rush, no machinery, just rhythm, just time. Down the winding footpath she went, past rows of cabbages, past the hens picking at the earth, past the chapel whose bell hadn't yet rung. The stream was waiting. Its waters moved slowly, not deep, but always moving, just as they always had. Children splashed here in summer. Sheep drank here in spring. And today, it was for washing. She knelt at the bank, dipping the cloth into the cold water. A sharp inhale, not from pain, but from awareness. Cold water wakes the skin, sharpens the breath. Still, she smiled. The linen was soaked, wrung out and rubbed with ash soap, made from wood and water and thyme. Then scrubbed gently over a flat stone, the way her mother had shown her. And her mother before that. Around her, other women came, each with a bundle of laundry, a quiet greeting, and a shared knowledge of the task. This was not just work. It was company. Stories were exchanged softly. News, laughter, silences too. All without rush. The village stream was more than a place for washing. It was where lives were shared, not in speeches, but in the small, repeated actions of the everyday. Some women hummed softly. A lullaby once sung to a child long grown. Others spoke of bread dough rising back home, or of aching knees, or of dreams that visited them the night before. Even as they worked, their hands never paused. Dip, wring, rub, rinse. A rhythm older than memory. And when the last sheet had been lifted, heavy and dripping, the women rose, backs aching, but hearts lightened. They walked home slowly, with the scent of ash and water still on their skin, and the satisfaction of clean cloth warming in the midday sun. Back at the cottage, the morning's wash was hung gently across a low wooden rack near the hearth, the drops pattering softly onto the packed earth below. There was no hurry. Drying took time. With the fire now steady and the home quiet once more, it was time for spinning. The spindle waited, simple, wooden, worn smooth from years of turning. A distaff rested nearby, cradling a tuft of raw wool, cleaned, combed, and carded by hand. She sat near the small window where a narrow shaft of daylight poured in. Her stool was low. Her movements, unhurried. She reached for the wool, pulled a delicate length, and began to spin. One hand twisted the fiber. The other guided it. Her fingers knew the weight, the tension. She didn't need to look. Spin, pull, twist. Each turn of the spindle made the wool tighter, longer, stronger. Like time stretching out beneath her hands. She thought of little things as she worked. A chicken that hadn't laid. The new priest's quiet voice. Whether the baby next door was still feverish. But she didn't speak. Not yet. Her thoughts moved like the thread. Slow, steady, without end. Spinning was quiet work, but not lonely. The cottage might fill with soft footsteps, perhaps a daughter returning from the market, or a neighbor bringing lentils in a cloth sack, wrapped in thanks for help last week. The spindle turned through it all. Stories often came out while spinning. Not loud ones, just those that slipped out naturally. Like the tale of the woman who once spun wool so fine, it was said to pass through the eye of a needle without touching the sides. No one knew if it was true. It didn't matter. The story spun on, like the wool, and when the afternoon light began to soften, and the thread had grown long enough to coil, she gently wound it onto a wooden reel. The basket beside her was slowly filling, thread by thread, hour by hour. It wasn't about rushing. It never was. It was about filling the day with something useful, something beautiful, something lasting, and tomorrow the thread would be woven. But for now, the spindle was set aside, and the fire was stirred once more. There was always more wool. There was always more time. The sun, now low in the sky, cast long shadows through the small window. The thread that had been spun earlier, soft, careful, and even, was ready for its next journey. The loom stood quietly against the far wall of the cottage, tall and wooden, its frame worn by years of gentle labor. It wasn't grand, but it was dependable. Built by someone's father, or perhaps passed down by a grandmother whose hands once moved as surely as hers. She approached it with the quiet reverence of someone who understood its rhythm. Weaving was not something one rushed. It was a conversation between hands and wood, between thread and time. The warp threads were already set, strung vertically, and held in tension. Her task now was the weft, the thread that passed over and under, back and forth, forming the fabric of daily life. She sat down. Her body knew the position, her legs braced gently against the beam. Her hands reached for the shuttle, a smooth, narrow piece of wood cradling the spun yarn. She began. Over, under, beat, over, under, beat. The sound was soft but steady. A tap, a slide, a hush of thread against thread. She wasn't alone. Not really. Every woman who had ever sat at a loom was with her. Mothers, aunts, grandmothers, and those remembered only by the feel of a blanket or the hem of a dress they once made. The fabric grew slowly, row by row, line by line. Sometimes a mistake appeared, a skipped thread, a knot. But she didn't worry. Mistakes were part of the cloth, part of life. She would correct it quietly, gently, and continue. Outside, the voices of children echoed faintly, chasing one another down the path toward the fields. Chickens clucked softly in their coop. The world kept moving, but here, in the loom's quiet embrace, time slowed. The cloth she wove today might become a tunic or a swaddling blanket, or be stored away for a colder season. It might be mended 10 times before it was finally cut into rags. Nothing was wasted. Everything had its purpose. And still, she worked. Over, under, beat. As the last light of day pulled its golden thread across the cottage wall, she tied off her place, wound the shuttle, and stood. The loom would wait for her again tomorrow. And in the quiet of this room, where every thread held a moment, she felt something close to peace. Not pride, not urgency, just the quiet knowing that her work, simple and steady, was a thread in something far larger than herself. Evening came softly. There was no great signal, no clang of bells or rush of carriages, only the slow dimming of light. A sky that once held sun now wore the soft gray blue of twilight. The chickens had long gone to roost. The village paths grew quiet. Inside the cottage, the fire was stirred again, not with haste, but with the same rhythm as always. A few dry twigs, the crackle of warmth returning. A pot of lentils simmered nearby, sending up the earthy scent of rosemary and onion. It wasn't a feast, but it was enough. It was always enough. She sat again by the hearth, her back against the bench, her hands busy with the small but important work that evening's invited. Mending a frayed hem, tightening the seams of a sleeve, patching the soft corner of a child's blanket. There was peace in this kind of work. No one watched. No one hurried her. A quiet knock might come at the door, a neighbor bringing a small dish of broth, or a child asking if she had any candle stubs to spare. Nothing more than a whisper, and the door would close again. Silence would settle back like dust. This was the time for reflection, not with words, but with thoughts. What had been done was done. What wasn't would wait. There was no schedule. Only the fire, the wool, and the soft rhythm of repair. Sometimes she hummed. Not a song, exactly. More a sound from deep in the chest. A low comfort that rose and faded without name or tune. A few embroidered cloths sat folded in her lap. Things she worked on between chores. Not to sell, not to impress. Just for beauty. Just for herself. A little bird stitched in red thread. A line of ivy leaves trailing along a hem. Simple things. Quiet joys. The room darkened slowly, and she lit a single beeswax candle. Its flame was gentle, not bright. It danced slightly with every draft, casting soft golden arcs across the wooden beams above. A few more stitches. A deep breath. Then her hands finally paused. There was a comfort in stopping. in knowing the work would be there tomorrow, and so would she. She banked the fire, pressing ash over the embers to keep them sleeping until morning, folded her mending cloth, blew out the candle, and for the first time all day, the room was truly still. There was no noise, no task left to tend, only the hush of night, the cool air pressing against the windows, the soft rustle of a blanket being drawn over tired limbs, and beneath it all, the simple, gentle feeling of enough. The sky outside had turned deep indigo, the last traces of daylight disappearing behind the hills. The village lay in near silence now, only the distant bark of a dog, the creak of wood settling in the cool night, or a shutter softly closing against the wind. Inside the cottage, all was ready. She had drawn the woolen curtain across the window, not for privacy, so much as warmth. The cold pressed in from the world beyond, and the home, small as it was, held what heat it could. Her bed stood waiting in its familiar corner, not grand or soft by our standards, but built with care. A simple wooden frame, a mattress of straw and wool, a thick, hand-woven blanket, heavy and warm. She removed her outer gown and hung it neatly near the hearth. Her shift, linen long and worn soft, would be her sleeping garment. It was always the same. She sat on the edge of the bed, fingers folded in her lap, and lowered her head for a moment of quiet prayer. Not dramatic, not whispered with urgency, just a soft murmur of gratitude. For the fire that had burned, for the wool that had held, for the bread that had risen, for the day that had passed. Then she lay down. The blanket rustled as she pulled it over her shoulder. She shifted once, then stilled. Sometimes, a child might curl beside her, seeking warmth, or a husband might murmur something half-dreamt before sleep carried him away. But tonight, perhaps, there was only silence. In the dark, her mind wandered lightly. She thought of the washing folded by the fire, the thread she had spun, now waiting to be woven, the soup she might prepare with barley next week, a face she hadn't seen in a long time, a dream she hoped might visit her again. Outside, the moon had risen, pale and watchful. Its light filtered through the cracks of the shutter, catching on the soft edges of things, on wood and wool and woven cloth. The world grew stiller with each breath, not in finality, but in rest. Sleep came not as a sudden wave, but as a gentle tide, rising, curling, carrying her thoughts farther and farther until they faded into the hush of dreams. And in the small cottage, on a simple bed, wrapped in warmth and quiet, she drifted, as she had the night before, as she would again tomorrow. Because this was life, not grand, not loud, but deeply, softly full. And now you too may let go. There is no more to do tonight, nothing to remember, nothing to rush, just the breath, the stillness, and the slow, kind rhythm of sleep. Good night.